When you follow professional wrestling, more specifically WWE, for over 3 decades, you develop this ability. Some call it a premonition, others call it a sixth sense. I just call it the ability to realize the precise moment when a character slash superstar slash wrestler is about to explode in the business. When they're about to hit pay dirt, when they're about to reach levels never before seen in their career. But on the flip side, you also have the ability to realize the precise moment when it's all about to fall apart, when their career is about to dwindle into obscurity. This is the sad story of Bayley in her main roster career thus far, in the exact moment where she was about to explode and hit pay dirt, in the exact moment it all dwindled into obscurity. And for Bayley, this is a rare case, because both those moments, a moment of epicness and a moment of tragedy, they both happened for Bayley in the same night, within a half hour of one another. What is the Amplified Man talking about? First, let's set the stage. Who's Bayley, right? Bayley was one of the most promising females. Forget that word, females. She was one of the most promising superstars that we were all awaiting on. The main roster, once they got Bayley, things were going to change, because Bayley, she was the centerpiece of NXT in that female division. And when you looked at NXT as a whole, Bayley was one of the glues that kept it all together. She was the main attraction to many people. When you knew you were going to NXT, Bayley was one of the first names you would shoot out. Oh, can't wait to see Bayley. Grown adults walking around with those purple Bayley shirts. But it was cool. It's Bayley. And when she gets to the main roster, you sure as hell better bet she is going to have the same type of success, and maybe even more so. Because she had the capability. The character was there, obviously. But the wrestling? Bayley had it all. So how could this possibly go wrong? Well, first of all, we're talking Vince McMahon and his creators, so they can turn gold into shit. Just give them 24 hours and let them collect their brains together and come up with some stupidity and nonsensical bullshit, and I assure you, gold will turn to shit. And Epic Bayley will turn to tragedy. Superstar Bayley will fall into obscurity. And it can all be done in 24 hours if you leave it in the hands of Vince McMahon and his creators. But even they shocked the Amplified Man, because they were able to turn epicness into tragedy. They were able to turn gold into shit. They were able to turn superstar into obscurity in a half an hour when it came to Bayley. Because you see, Bayley got to the main roster finally, and when she got to the main roster, it was very lackluster, wasn't it? They had nothing for her, which seems to be the theme for the main roster for Vince McMahon when they get these NXT talents. They bring them up, and they don't have anything for them. Ember Moon, the casual fan to this very day, doesn't even really know who Ember Moon is, and doesn't know why they should give a shit. And if you're following Vince McMahon's story, his process for Ember Moon, there's no reason to care about Ember Moon. And that's tragic, because Ember Moon is phenomenal. But we'll stick with Bayley here. Bayley gets to the main roster, and through it all, her whole ride, she is basically mid-card level at best, and I'm being generous. So then came the night of June 25th, 2018. This was Bayley and Sasha Banks in the same ring together, and Bayley did something none of us thought we'd ever see. And we ended up loving it, didn't we? She turned heel, if only for the moment. She turned heel. She attacked best friend Sasha. Now, for months at that point, they were having some turbulence in their relationship. There was a hot and cold switch every single night with them. Amplified Man says, and most of us would agree if you remember back to that storyline, it dragged on way too long. This should have culminated in a big match at WrestleMania, but they chose not to do that. So here we find ourselves end of June 25th, 2018, and they're still bickering. But now it led to something epic, something we didn't think we were actually gonna see. Bayley turned on Sasha. We had thought it would be the other way around. And if you go back to that beating, it was vicious. That's why we called it a heel turn. This wasn't a slap to Sasha. This wasn't I'm gonna turn my back to Sasha. This was a vicious beating. Literally tossing, chucking Sasha Banks from inside the ring to the mat outside. Tossing, chucking, slamming Sasha Banks into the steel steps. Looking over her, screaming at her. I'm sick of you thinking you're better than me. Smacking her in her face. Throwing the bows. This was a vicious heel turn. Or what should have been. You looked at the crowd. They were all chanting yes, screaming, loving it. In attendance. Crowd at home? Oh, we loved it. Oh, we loved it. Edge of our seat. Is Bayley really doing this? This is cool. Whether you were at home or you were in that crowd, that Bayley turn, that is not only what that character needed, but that was a refreshing awakening for the crowd, for a feud that dragged out as long as it did. For that type of beginning to the end, because now you think SummerSlam, Bayley Sasha, for that type of beginning to the end, now business picked up. Now we were all like, okay, we're willing to forgive how long this took because that was cool. You go back to that June 25th turn that Bayley did on Sasha, and I want you guys to do me a favor. You look at the crowd's reaction. That was going to be something very cool. And then her music hit. Bayley's music hit. And it's this happy-go-lucky, life is full of rainbows music. In a weird way, it was perfectly fitting for what this new Bayley was and who she was going to be going forward. A mix of crazy AJ Lee in that character and a mix of crazy Mickie James, that character. But Bayley could take it to a whole nother level. Because she could put on an act like she's all about doing the right things. She's teaching kids positivity, but her actions, those are totally different. It was there sitting in their lap, this whole story, in this epic Bayley catapulting to the moon. You strapped a rocket on her back and you let her soar with this new heel character. It was sitting in their lap. Not to mention a kick-ass first feud with Sasha Banks going into SummerSlam. It was all sitting in their lap. And you looked at the crowd, and this is obviously what we all wanted. This is what Bayley needed, but this is what the crowd needed too. This is what Sasha needed. This was going to lead to SummerSlam, a huge match, Sasha Bayley. And you still had weeks to go. A whole nother month and a half of story to really kick this into high gear with Sasha and Bayley. Up to that point, we felt it was just dragging on. But now with this new Bayley, and now she could turn on this sadistic, crazy switch. And Sasha, who we all thought was going to be the heel character in all of this, she's now the victim. She's now having to watch her back at all angles, all costs, all corners. It's Bayley, who's this crazy individual, and again, her music plays, and it's this happy-go-lucky, everything's rainbows music, but she's kind of like this sadistic, crazy character now. She has this switch. It was there in their lap. And in the very next segment, in some weird, tragic irony, that same night that next segment, Vince McMahon ruined it all. He had Kurt Angle in a backstage segment announce and tell Bayley face to face that she had to go to counseling. Basically an anger management counseling. And just like that, the new white-hot, kick-ass, newly formed Bayley was booked to be a sideshow clown in counseling. Not long after, Sasha would show up with her and sit next to her in these counseling segments. The two would make up, and they would go through the entire rest of 2018 as a tag team taking on the Riot Squad. Basically every single week. And most of the time they were just losing. Now, you would think you would get an ultimate payoff with the tag team, right? They're going to get tag team championships, and it's going to be something special, BC. This is what I heard all at the end of 2018, all into 2019. And what ended up happening was they got the tag team championships. They held them for about a month, maybe 5-6 weeks, tops. They had one real title defense that was at, I believe it was called Fastlane with Nia and Tamina, and that match ended schmozzily because when it was all said and done, Beth Phoenix was the real story in that whole matchup. Beth Phoenix really returned. So, what did we really get? We got all of the 2018 tag team in 2019 for a 5 to 6 week title reign with no real memorable matches that you're going to remember with Sasha and Bayley defending those titles. You're probably not even going to remember the night they won the titles because that was also in a schmaz fest. The tragic thing here is I told you guys this is where this was going from the beginning. I told you guys. And sometimes you just got to let it play out for everyone to see what you mean. That was the moment Bayley was going to be skyrocketed to the moon. Sasha, on her own, can always recover and do her own thing and be catapulted to the moon. Trust me, no question. So she would have been fine. But for Bayley, we're talking about her tragic run on the main roster. And I say thus far. But guys, she's already been here a few years. And if you look at her recent matches, she's just being paraded out there to take L's. Lay flat on her back. This is the Bayley today. And again, if you go back to the Bayley of yesterday, the Bayley of NXT, and you would have told me that this would be Bayley today, laying flat on her back for everybody, I would have said you've done fallen and bumped your head way too many times as a child. There's no way that would be Bayley. And Bayley just seems like she doesn't have that same confidence and that she doesn't have that same ability and capability wrestling-wise on the main roster that she did in NXT. Recently, though, it looked like she gained that confidence back, that new mean streak. It looked like she gained those aspects that she had in NXT. It looked like they were back in her. And that's even more tragic because now it looks like she was rolling on all cylinders and they still want to rip the rug from underneath her. I don't know what they did backstage, Sasha and Bayley, but it's got to be something really bad for Vince to literally at this point, I would say, hate them. Because this has to be hate. There's no way you could take talents like Sasha Banks and Bayley and totally put them into obscurity like Vince has done for so long. And then the report comes out by Sasha herself that says she and Bayley actually begged Vince McMahon for the longest time for tag titles. So you could say maybe Sasha and Bayley are part to blame for that whole tag team failure in 2018 and into 2019. Maybe they are part to blame, but it's Vince McMahon in his business sense. It's supposed to be his business mind to see what's best for business. To hear that reaction from the crowd when Bayley turned on Sasha and say, you know what? This is white hot. This is going to make us money. This is going to catapult you where you need to be. But it looked like Vince was okay from the very beginning at letting Sasha and Bayley sabotage their own careers with this tag team bullshit. Because that is what it ended up being. the rest was history. Becky Lynch ended up taking that storyline that was supposed to be Bayley's and Sasha's at the end of June. In the middle of August, not even 2 full months later, they had Becky Lynch do what Bayley did to Sasha. Becky Lynch turned on Charlotte Flair at SummerSlam, and the rest is history. Becky Lynch is the one that got all that white-hot momentum. Becky Lynch was the one that formed this new badass character. So badass that even though she was supposed to go heel, it ended up being a face. And now look at Becky Lynch today. But that was all supposed to be Bayley's. Again, go back to that June 25th, 2018 turn that Bayley did on Sasha. You look at that crowd. That was supposed to be Bayley going into SummerSlam. But no. They instead had them get back together, go to counseling, and form a bullshit tag team for the foreseeable future. And Becky Lynch ended up getting that storyline. And look what happened to Becky. That was supposed to be Bayley. Bayley, in one night, in 1/2 an hour, went from being one of the biggest superstars in the company, potentially, to tragically falling deeper into obscurity, and to this day, she's never gotten out of it. Not even with a tag team title championship victory that was created out of the blue, and those titles to this day are not significant or relevant. So was it all worth it in the end? When you look at where Becky Lynch is today, and when you look at where Bayley is today, one of them struck gold. The other one, they're in a sad place today. Can you guess which is which? And that, my friends, is where it all went wrong for Bayley. Thought this would be a special little stroll down memory lane, that type of video today. Because I talk a lot about Sasha Banks on this channel, right? And how Sasha Banks is being done dirty, and how Sasha Banks is rightfully justified for walking out on WWE after the way she's been treated for years. But we don't really talk a lot about Bayley. So I want to let you guys know where Bayley was about to take off and where it all got halted. All in the same night, all within a segment of each other, all in less than 1/2 an hour. Amazing when you go back in time and you look at some of these professional wrestling stories. And you say, if this one thing was tweaked, if this one thing was changed, if this was just switched up a bit, we would be talking about something totally different today. You might not have even seen that Becky Lynch heel turn at SummerSlam. It would all be different today. That WrestleMania triple threat main event never would have happened. In the eye of the beholder. For some, it would be like, wow, if only we could go back. For others, I'm glad it worked out that way. Who cares about Bayley, they're thinking, right? Becky Lynch deserves that. If you say Becky Lynch deserves that, I don't see how Bayley wouldn't. When you followed Bayley's career through NXT into the main roster, I don't see how you would say Sasha doesn't deserve more, right? You say 4 title opportunities, but that was all for about a month. It seemed like the second she won it, the next week or 2 weeks later, she was losing it. And that's all she's ever gotten in the year she's been here. Bayley has gotten really nothing. I think she had 1 title reign, not for a long time, and then the tag team title reign for a few weeks. But again, these same people say Becky deserves the world. Other people could have had that world as well. But it's nights like these, June 25th, 2018, when it looks so promising, and it all goes so tragic. I'm the Amplified Man. I'll see you guys Tuesday morning for Monday Night Raw's review and reaction. For now, check you later.